You look at the NBA and you see some of those really big jumpers. You look at their calves and they're usually pretty lackluster. Kind of the running joke in powerlifting is like, oh, 5 reps. I didn't know I was doing cardio today, coach. A lot of people will back off right away. They'll be like, I'm going to hurt myself. Like, it feels like it's about to tear off the bone, coach. I'm like, Strongman's an interesting beast, man, because Strongman, you need, I'd really argue you need all the elements.
All right, Chris, thanks for coming.
Of course, man. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
The reason why I brought you back is because I saw this video where a bunch of bodybuilders, right? They were doing a push-up, they were doing a bench press competition, and it was like 225, and they were doing partial reps, but they were going all the way up to like 50, something like that. Pretty impressive numbers.
Yeah.
And then there's this kid, I'm guessing he's a kid, on the comment section and said, "Full range of motion, bro." And he got attacked left and right. So this is why, like, I'm bringing you back here. So we'll talk about some of that.
Yeah, definitely, man.
So let's talk about the basics of strength. Can you walk us through that before we talk about endurance, speed, strength, power, etc.?
Yeah. Strength is very, very specific. And I think that's why you see so many of these heated arguments or conversations over social media or even in the gym of this is what works, this is what doesn't work. It's because, well, it really just depends on what you're trying to accomplish, right? Are you trying to put on a lot of size for a bodybuilding competition, or are you trying to lift a really, really heavy weight, or are you trying to be an Olympic lifter and move something that's heavy, but move it, you have to be very, very explosive, right? So, there's a heavy genetic role in that and what your ceiling looks like and what any given individual is capable of. But we all have the ability to adapt and kind of specialize in one of those areas or a couple of those areas. So really, when we're talking strength, most people are thinking force production, right? Like, how much force are you able to produce? That's why 1 rep maxes are such a big thing. It's really an indication of how much force you're able to produce. Right, which is pretty different from power, which is how quickly can you generate that force, okay? And then you also have the endurance component. It's like, well, how many times can you do a given weight? How many repetitions can you perform? How much endurance do you have? So yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can kind of define strength, and there's a lot of different ways that you can take it, but primarily strength refers to the amount of force that you can produce.
How about let's go ahead and start with endurance. What kind of range of motion are you looking for in the reps, sets, so on, even periodization?
Totally. So again, there's a caveat every single to one of these questions, right? It's like, okay, well, what is the purpose? Why are you training that? So if we're talking endurance, and it comes to range of motion, it comes to repetitions, comes to set, overall volume, it's going to be based on the goal. So range of motion for someone who's, swimming's my background. So if we're looking at swimmers, the range of motion that they're going to be training endurance in is probably a little bit different than like if we're talking maybe more on the metabolic conditioning side. If we're looking at a CrossFitter, or if we're looking at High Rocks, I know is pretty big right now, and there's a big endurance component there. Yeah, it just depends on the demand of the sport. It depends on the demand of the goal. You want those to align as best as possible to get the most out of the training. So as far as reps go, yeah, you're going to be wanting to use higher repetitions. Now, that can vary so much dramatically, right? Because endurance is also pretty broad. However, like you're probably going to be looking over the 12 rep range, like 15 plus even sometimes. Even within swimming, if I'm training, someone who's a miler versus like 1,000 or a 500, they're going to have kind of different reps and different sets. But really the end goal is increasing the capacity of that muscle, right? So we're looking at increasing mitochondrial density through mitochondrial biogenesis, and that requires a specific stimulus, right? And that is going to be that metabolic buildup from the repetitions that you're performing.
Can you explain mitochondrial density real quick for those who don't know?
Mitochondrial density is just like how many mitochondria you have in a given area, right? So if you have a muscle that you're trying to increase the endurance of, you want to stress that muscle metabolically to increase the number of mitochondria present. That's going to increase your mitochondrial density, right? So depending on the training status of the person, that might look a little bit different, but you got to be getting to the point of fatigue for sure. And it's going to be in that aerobic or oxidative zone. So you're going to need to be higher repetitions. Otherwise, you're going to be relying on phosphagen system. You're going to be relying on the glycolytic system. So it's got to be sustained, and you got to be feeling that burn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For those of you who don't know, the phosphagen and the oxidative stuff, that's the different energy systems, right? So like phosphagen is really short, explosive. You're talking like 6 to 10 seconds kind of thing. And then glycolytic has a little bit more of a range, but that's like, you could consider that mid distance, or like, so for swimming, that's going to be like the 200, 500 into that range, but 500 gets a little bit more on the oxidative. So it's a spectrum of the energy systems. Phosphagen is short, glycolytic's kind of in that medium range, and then oxidative is much longer and slower. Yeah. So the oxidative, most of you, it's also called aerobic, right?
Aerobic, yeah.
Also called aerobic. Mm-hmm. Okay. So how about speed?
Okay. So speed, there's a lot of factors that go into speed as well. So speed, and there's some overlap and kind of some interplay between speed and power. But if you're talking speed specifically, we're going to be looking at contraction velocity, which is going to be a combination of, it's going to be a result of like structural adaptations to the muscle as well as neuromuscular adaptations.
Ooh, talk about that.
The neuromuscular
those structural and
yeah. So like structural, and there's some really great experts out there. Brad Schoenfeld he knows all things muscle. He's one of the leading scientists on muscle hypertrophy research. If you're looking for a real deep dive, he's a great resource. But we're talking like pennation angle, so like the fibers in relation to the tendon. Generally, a smaller muscle will actually contract faster because it's going to be in line, right? It's going to be more efficient. But then you also have some interplay with the tendon itself. So if you have a really stiff tendon, you're probably going to be able to create faster contraction velocities. So you can train the tendon, you can train the muscle, but the neuromuscular adaptations, we're talking like the firing frequency of the muscle, the efficiency of the muscular contraction. You have to basically turn off the antagonists so that you're not fighting your own body as well as the load, or as well as the resistance, right? So that, like, let's say my triceps super engaged and I'm trying to do a bicep curl. Now I'm fighting the weight that's in my hand, the dumbbell, as well as my tricep. Over time, you can train the body to kind of dampen that effect from the tricep or the antagonist, the opposing muscle group, so that you can contract faster. There's a coordination element too within the muscle itself. Are all those motor units firing together? Are they synchronized? And like pretty much all of those elements are trainable, but there's still going to be some factors like fiber length and tendon insertion, right? Like, great example of this, you look at the NBA and you see some of those really big jumpers. You look at their calves and they're usually pretty lackluster. And the reason for that, it is so much tendon, right? So now there's not a ton of muscle that has to contract, right? It's shorter. The muscle belly itself is smaller. However, the tendon is really long. So you get this quick contraction, and then the tendon, it just makes it so explosive, so fast.
So with speed, how do you load that though? Heavy or light?
It depends on which one of those adaptations you're looking at. Right. But for a lot of the neuromuscular stuff, it's very, very fast. It has to be max effort. So you're looking at like Olympic lifts are a great way, especially if they're not super heavy. Like, you want that muscle to shorten as quickly as possible. When it gets too heavy, then maybe the contraction speed slows down, and then we start getting into some different types of adaptations. But yeah, it's going to be like, you're looking at things like sprints. You're looking at like ballistic movements where you're like medicine ball stuff, anything that you're turning the resistance into a projectile. Jumping can be great for that as well. And there's some really unique ways to train that, but it's good. Basically, it's going to be very, very high intensity with low volume. Because if you're like, oh, I want to get really fast, I'm just going to hit 20 reps of really, really fast. Well, guess what? About 2 or 3 of those are going to be really fast. And then the rest is going to be training something completely different.
So you mentioned something about making sure that you're fresh.
Totally. So this is one of those qualities where, and this is why sequencing in a workout is so important, right? So let's say, okay, I've got my 90-minute training session. I'm going to go in and you know what? I want to be looking good while I'm doing that, my sport specific work. So I'm going to hit some curls. I'm going to get a little bit of a pump. I'm going to do some like normal, let's say we're working in the 8 to 12 rep range. You have accumulated enough fatigue that you are no longer able to produce the same amount of force in the same amount of time to get those neuromuscular adaptations. The neurological component requires you to be fairly rested. If you're under a lot of fatigue, maybe your nutrition wasn't right, maybe your sleep was off, it's just not going to happen, right? So you have to be fresh in the sense that you don't want to be doing that stuff after you've already accumulated fatigue prior in the workout. So generally it's like, okay, warm up, make sure you've got your mobility where you need it and the joints are all warm and ready to go. Now you're going to want to jump right into that stuff that's really, really explosive before you get tired from doing the rest of your workout. So sequencing, the power stuff should always come first. It's basically a non-negotiable. You cannot hit power work after you've already done a bunch of hypertrophy work or even strength work, unless you're doing, something like a contrast set where you're using a really, really heavy load to potentiate that lighter load. So I don't know if you've seen this before, but people will do something like they'll do a really heavy deadlift for 1 to 3 reps, something like that. And then they'll do a jump, right? So they ramp their nervous system up so that they can produce a lot of force quickly. And then the body's kind of ramped up, ready to go. And then you can use that to jump higher. Post-activation, post-activation, potentiation, PAP. And it's a great tool, but it's something you really have to understand to implement it well, because there's a lot of ways to do it wrong.
We're still at speed. You mentioned power now. What's the difference between speed and power?
Power, you've got that force component and you've got the velocity component, right? If we look at the force velocity curve and it goes from high force output all the way down to low force output, high velocity, right? So imagine this graph, right? On the left-hand side, you've got very, very high force output, very, very low velocity. Something like a 1 rep max deadlift. I think we've all seen that lift in the gym before where it's like, man, that is moving, but just barely, right? That's going to be on the left-hand side of the graph. That's high force, low velocity. Speed is going to be the exact opposite. So it's going to be a really low load, or even sometimes you can go into the range of like super physiological load. So like, let's say we're doing a jump with band assistance. That's faster than I could jump without the band, right? I'm deloading my body. Power is going to be more in the middle of that. It's going to have moderate load, and then you just want to hit as much, as highest velocity as you're capable of doing. So you want to think of speed 0 to 30% of a 1 rep max, if that's how we're framing it. Whereas, the strength is going to be 80 to 100. Power, you're looking at 60 to 70% tends to be the range where that really comes through. That type of adaptation happens most efficiently.
How do you effectively train for that rep-wise? Let's start with rep-wise.
If we're looking power specifically, you can kind of go in the moderate range for that. Like when I'm training power with our athletes, I really like 3 to 5, sometimes 3 to 6 reps. Again, because there's still a velocity component. So you don't want to just go until you can't anymore, because now you're getting into, it's no longer power. The velocity it has to be present. Where speed, like we're hitting tops, right? We're hitting as much velocity as possible. So there has to be a lighter load. And we're looking at even lower reps than that. Like 1 to 3 is probably the range that you're looking at for speed and that explosive quality.
How about sets? Is it different for those two?
A lot of that is going to depend on the individual, in my experience and in my opinion. So like someone with a high training age, they've been doing it for a long time, they've got all their nutrition, they've got great genetics, they can probably handle a little bit higher volume, so they can probably bang out more sets. And with a lot of this stuff, we're always talking about a spectrum, right? So like if we're looking max speed, like it's like, okay, if I'm trying to hit 12 really effective reps and I want it to be speed and that's all I care about, maybe I do 12 by 1, right? Whereas like, well, I need some speed, but I also need to have, you know, some capacity there. Maybe I'm doing sets of 3 and I just break it up that way. So if you're doing the lower end of the rep range, you're probably going to require more sets to get there. But if you're more in the middle range or to the higher end of that range of rep range, then you can probably get away with fewer sets. That's where I really like the velocity-based training, because you get a very objective measurement of, okay, let's see, what's the highest velocity that we've got on books at this weight? Okay, we want to be there or very close to it. As soon as I drop maybe 10% under that, I know for sure anything underneath that's probably going to produce very little effect. So it does require a little bit more feedback, whereas max strength is like, you lift it or you don't. You know, you can kind of tell if you've gotten that stimulus.
You mentioned tendons earlier. Is tendon adaptation or tendon strength a prerequisite for these, I'm guessing?
Yes, definitely. More so some than others. I would say that if you're looking at the speed side of things, like the tendon stiffness has to be there. Now, I would just say different levels required for the different types of training. Like if you're putting a lot of force through that tendon very quickly, you want it to be stiff, because if it's not, then what are we doing? We're losing some of that velocity, because now I'm pulling on the tendon's giving before it's actually moving what I'm trying to move. So when you have a really stiff tendon, that muscle contracts, it pulls on the bone, boom, you got what you want.
That's why it's an advantage for basketball players, volleyball players.
Yeah,
sprinters.
I mean, tendon stiffness basically leads to an ability to contract more explosively and a more efficient way to recycle energy, right? So like for runners, if I'm running and I've got a very compliant tendon, it's moving around a lot, I'm not going to get as much energy return on every stride, because I hit the ground, I'm spending more time on the ground, I'm not getting as much of that elastic energy that's stored in the tendon recycled and returned to me, right? So a stiffer tendon, we'll see athletes that are like kind of poppy or snappy, like they can just, boom, they hit the ground, they can change direction, they can hit the ground, they can get off the ground very quickly. They store that energy and they release that energy. That's that stretch shortening cycle, right? So it has to be very, very quick. Anytime you stretch that tendon, the longer it's spent in a stretched position, the more of that energy is released as heat. And now you just don't get it returned to the system. So different levels of stiffness is required for different athletes. But if you're looking explosive, a stiff tendon is incredibly important. If you're looking speed, very, very important. Power, still important, right? Because it has to happen quickly. Now, max strength, you need to have a strong enough tendon that it's not going to rip off, right? But there's less of a velocity component to it. And really those high mechanical loads are what tend to stimulate the tendon to become stiffer in the first place.
How do you train tendon?
Tendons are something that I remember getting through school and graduating and being like, wow, like we talked about that, but we really didn't talk that much about it. And I think the science on it is definitely still continuing to improve and evolve. But I'm a really, really big fan of, I like 3 seconds in a lengthened position under a heavy load to get a tendon to become stiffer.
How heavy? Like RPE
I'm talking
wise,
like
or RIR?
I'm talking like 80%.
Oh, yeah, heavy.
Yeah. Now you can also get an adaptation there from like plyos and stuff, right? But it's a little bit different, and it's a little bit harder to measure, in my opinion. Whereas like, okay, let's say I'm working the Achilles, I want to be strong, I want to be bouncy. I'm going to do a controlled calf raise where I'm spending at least 3 seconds in that lengthened position so that signal can travel muscle, tendon, all the way down to the cell. And that's what actually signals the tendon to adapt and become stiffer. Also can become thicker. It just increases collagen protein synthesis. And that's what really makes a tendon strong.
You said calf raise where you're explain the lengthened position for everyone. It's
when you're down. Yep. So when you think of stretching a muscle, that's the lengthened position, right? So like if I'm doing a bicep curl and I'm like, oh man, I already tore this bicep tendon off. I don't want to tear this bicep tendon off. I'm going to do a slow eccentric, and then I'm going to get at least a 3-second hold when it's
that's the lengthened position.
Or stretched.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the strength
and then
position.
I'm going to bring it back.
Okay.
Right. So isos are great too. You can just do long isos, especially under, fairly heavy load as well. That can even affect the architecture of the tendon. It can get those fibers more aligned. If they can get a little bit tangled, they can get a little bit messy, right? So you put them under a high load and you keep them there, and it kind of helps that tendon restructure and be aligned more with the force that's being applied through it.
Swimming's your sport. Give us an example of like a movement, a rep of a specific exercise that you like to use for your athletes.
Are we talking tendon still?
Yeah. Tendon. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's actually a really fun one for me personally, because when they're hitting the wall on a flip turn, right, they've got 90 degrees at the hip. They tend to be about 90, give or take 15 degrees at the knee. And then they're actually pushing off their forefoot, right? You're not going to hit the wall with a flat foot, because now you don't get that bounce through the ankle complex. So you don't really get that Achilles. If you're going to jump and you're trying to jump high, you're not going to be pushing through your heel, right? You want to be driving through that forefoot. So I'll have them do heavy isos, sometimes with like a belt squat or a similar setup, where they're in that deep squat position with that ankle at just slightly above neutral, right? About the angle that they hit the wall. And then they're just going to hold it, right? So now they're getting tendon adaptations at the knee. That's going to be more of a long iso hold for the calf, but we'll sometimes even throw them on a seated calf, put them into a stretch position, and then do, a set scheme that I've seen thrown around is 8 sets of 5, where you're doing those long 3 counts in a stretch position. And again, it has to be heavy. I think the movement that people are probably most familiar with that sensation would be a Nordic curl, where you're locked in on a bench, and you're lowering yourself down from your knees, and your hammies are just getting lit up, right? A lot of times the next day it's like, oh, it doesn't even feel like my muscle. It feels like higher or lower. It's like, yeah, well, you're feeling the tendon right now. The tendon is going to adapt from that. But if you've never experienced stressing the tendon before, a lot of people will back off right away. They'll be like, I'm going to hurt myself. Like, it feels like it's about to tear off the bone, coach. I'm like,
the first time I had that, oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was quite something.
It's incredibly uncomfortable, and it can last, the tendon heals quite a bit slower than muscle, so it can last a little bit longer than you want it to.
Mm-hmm. That's why you got Peptides for that.
Yeah, there's that's going to be the stimulus, right? And there's a little bit of a controversial topic, but like people take collagen peptides, right? So collagen peptides, they are basically it's amino acids that are more conducive for stimulating collagen protein synthesis. Glycine is a big one, proline and hydroxyproline, I think, is the other one. Those 3 are what really drive collagen protein synthesis. Mm-hmm. So, you take your whey, stimulates muscle protein synthesis if you're looking for muscle growth. Mm-hmm. But if you're training the tendon and you're just taking whey, well, it doesn't really have the building blocks you need to rebuild the tendon. Mm-hmm. So the controversy behind that is that they haven't found a great correlation between supplementation and adaptation, right? They're like, okay, well, we gave them the collagen peptides, put them through this tendon protocol. We didn't really see much of a change between the placebo group and the collagen group. No. It has to be, from what I've seen, it has to be prior to training so that it is present when you are stressing that tendon. Whereas muscle protein synthesis is like, hey, get your protein in, get your whey whenever. Collagen, the timing seems to be much more important as to whether or not the tendon is actually able to uptake it and utilize it for building a stronger tendon.
Yeah. I think the big one right now is the Wolverine stack. Have you heard of the TB500 and
So those are a little bit different.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, guys, since we're talking about sports specific here, this is not WADA does not want you to be doing this. You are gonna get popped if you do TB500. So just this disclaimer.
I actually think that there's a huge medical application for those types of peptides. And again, this is stuff that a big reason that WADA doesn't like it, a big reason that they're not more common and more utilized is that, human studies are pretty lacking right now. There's a lot of animal data out there. There's a lot of anecdotal data out there. However, that is very, very different. Collagen peptides, that's just something you put in your shake, whatever you drink it. Those are peptides that you have to, there's other ways of getting those into your system. And yeah, that's not going to be, if you're an athlete, don't go that route. That's not going to end well because they're not approved. And while they do improve healing in that regard, and they do increase the rate at which your body can recover from things, and a lot of times with injuries, they can be a godsend for people. It's definitely not something that athletes should tap into if they're in a tested federation or any kind of sport overseen by WADA, because yeah, that's not going to go well. Yeah,
we're going to go back to endurance, speed, power, because I want to ask like specific exercises and sets for that. But let's go ahead and talk about strength.
Totally. I don't want to oversimplify this, but there's two really big factors when it comes to strength, right? There's muscle size, so cross-sectional area, how big is the muscle itself? And then basically, how fine-tuned is your race car? How fine-tuned is your nervous system? The neurological component of strength is a much bigger factor. So you take any given person and you look just at the size of their muscle, and it can explain, I've seen a lot of different stats, but somewhere between 60 and 90% of their strength. It's pretty highly correlated. But how efficiently they can use that muscle, how quickly they can tap into that strength, how much coordination there is, are the muscles firing together, are all the motor units coming into play all at once? That's going to be kind of that end cap, like that last little bit of, it's like the last 10 to 40%, right? So strength is, size is pretty much a requirement for strength. Now, there are some people that have very little neural inhibition. Their nervous system's like, hey, I don't care what happens to you. If you tell me to send 100%, we're going to send 100%. And then, the majority of us, that nervous system is a little bit like a helicopter parent, right? They're like, hey, I know you said you wanted 100. We're going to give you 60% just to make sure you don't hurt yourself. Now, you can train the nervous system to kind of back off a little bit so you can tap into more of that. But it's basically a governor or a regulator so that we don't hurt ourselves.
So you're saying the size, those are the two ingredients, or would there be more?
Again, that's a little bit oversimplified. Like you could get into a lot of other factors. Like there's still some structural components that go into that, right? Like the alignment of the fibers, the pennation angle, like tendon structure, that kind of thing as well. It's important and plays a role. And then even proportions, right? So like someone might have an incredible deadlift because their levers are just set up to move a ton of weight, but then you might watch them squat and be like, not great, right? So that's what I meant earlier when I said strength is very specific. Someone can be incredibly strong in one regard and then maybe not so much in another regard just based on how they're built. But, if we're looking within a single person, let's say, all right, we're looking at Clint when he's 20 and then we're looking at Clint when he's 35. Let's say Clint, when he's 35, put on 35 pounds of lean mass. Like you're the same person, but you got more size, you're going to be stronger, right? Assuming similar neurological
Yeah. So I think for this part of the topic, because we're going to go to hypertrophy so that people can see the difference between strength and hypertrophy. How do you train for strength? We can use powerlifting as an example, because that was
powerlifting is a strength sport, right? 100%. So, it's a weight class sport, so there's a weight component that goes into it. But basically, it's like the people that are the best at that sport are the ones who have good proportions, who are very, very coordinated and have practiced that same movement over and over. But they have to have the size too, right? So you have to spend some time accumulating that size, and then you have to train your nervous system to be able to use that muscle as efficiently as possible. We're talking heavy reps. We're talking 80+%. That's what really drives the neurological adaptations. And that's where you can get stronger without adding additional size, is by kind of fine tuning that nervous system, right?
Joe, your coach, told me this. So it's like, I didn't know, because like, I guess for us, we don't know anything about the sport, is that we try to limit the muscle from growing, but just get as strong as possible. You're looking for that, like, you know, if this is your body weight, try to lift like 5x your weight and stuff like that. But turns out what you're saying and what Joe's saying as well is like, you do have to get bigger to get stronger.
Yes, to a point, right? So like, let's say we're competing. I competed in the 242 weight class. So 110 kilos. If you have two competitors, one is 7% body fat, just peeled, all muscle, and then you got another lifter who's 25% body fat. Like, I'm going to bet you money, if they have a similar level of experience, that the one who's leaner is going to dramatically outperform the one who's not as lean, because they have a higher percentage of their weight is muscle, which is functional for their movements, right? So like, you have to have a certain amount of muscle. But like, on the other side of it, let's say we're competing in a really light weight class. Oh, I don't want to get super big. This is what my frame likes. This is what I feel best at. I'm just not a big person overall, whatever it is. At some point, if that's your class, yeah, you got to find a way to get stronger without putting on more weight, because now all of a sudden you're in a different class and you're just, you're getting destroyed in competition because you're at the bottom of the weight class. Someone else is maybe topped out at the top end of it. They just have more muscle. They're probably going to be stronger than you. There are some freaks out there that kind of break that rule a little bit, but you want to have as much muscle as you can while staying within your weight class, and then you want to optimize that. Right? Once you're at that top end, it's like, okay, yeah, now let's get you stronger without getting you bigger.
Because you can still get bigger if you want to go up to different weight classes. Something like that.
Exactly. And you'll see that a lot, is like some of the greats, they'll go and they'll dominate a weight class. Oh, I've got all the world records. Guess I'll just put on 20 pounds and take all the world records and then what next weight class up, like people will do that. Or sometimes they'll go the other way. They'll cut down a little bit, or they'll do like a really heavy water cut. So maybe they still walk around at a similar weight, but they manipulate their fluid intake and their electrolyte intake leading up to competition. So, well, the day before I stepped on the scale at, let's say I want to drop down to 220. Oh, I weighed in at 219. Went home, drank 7 gallons of water, ate 3 cows, a little bit of an exaggeration, right? But like, now all of a sudden you're stepping on the platform and you're still close to what your weight was at the higher weight class. That's also pretty common practice.
Let's be tactical. How do you train for this? Rep wise, sets wise?
Yeah. So with strength, because it is a lot of coordination. So it's not just like, hey, we're going to do 1 rep maxes every single day, right? Your joints are going to blow up. You're eventually going to accumulate fatigue. Maybe your form starts to break down and now you're not as efficient with that movement pattern. I mean, you want to spend time in that 80+% rep range, right? But maybe it makes more sense to do lower volume and a higher number of sets, right? So it's like, okay, maybe I do 8 sets of 2 at 85%, It's like, okay, now I can maintain good technique. I'm not going to failure so that I'm not like accumulating a ton of fatigue, but I'm still getting that neurological adaptation. But there's going to be periodization in that as well. And you still have to hit all of your accessory movements to bring up the stabilizers and that kind of thing. However, powerlifting is lifting heavy, and it's, kind of the running joke in powerlifting is like, oh, 5 reps. I didn't know I was doing cardio today, coach. 6 reps. What is this? 8 reps. Oh, I'm out of here. At least with the big lifts, those guys, they tend to want like, hey, put some weight on the bar and let me do a rep or 2 and then take a 6-minute break.
Yeah, there's a joke with that powerlifter. It's a meme where they bring like a blanket taken out in between sets.
It's actually like somewhat true. I've seen the lawn chairs. I've seen they're taken because they want to they want to be as close as they can to peak output for every given set, because they're being judged on how much weight they can move, right? So it's like, oh, they'll do a set and then they'll wait 6 minutes. And it's like, you did 2 reps and then you waited 6 minutes. You were in the gym for 2 hours and you did like 25 repetitions. It's like, sounds good to me.
Yeah. Is training for strength kind of like similar to speed, where you got to be fresh?
If time was not a constraint, you would like to be as fresh as possible, right? So that's why powerlifters tend to take such long rests between sets. It's like, hey, let's say I'm doing 5 sets of 4. If I take a minute between those 5 sets and they're fairly heavy, the last 2 sets are probably going to deteriorate quite a bit compared to if I had taken 6-7 minutes, right? So that's why you'll see that. Yeah, you want to be as fresh as you can. Now, you're still going to accumulate fatigue throughout the program as you train. However, anything you can do to increase your capacity, to increase your ability to continuously output high levels is going to be beneficial. So yeah, you do. It's just not nearly as sensitive as the speed component.
Let's go ahead and talk about hypertrophy. Most people know this, but let's go ahead and cover it in case they don't know. What are the requirements for maximal muscle growth?
Ooh, hit me with a loaded one, huh? Hold on, I got this figured out. I know there's a lot of debate, but I have the answer here.
Yeah, we'll see what people say on the comment section.
Yeah, I'm ready to get ratioed.
Yeah. Well, more views for us.
Yeah, there we go. So, I mean, you have to have the stimulus, and then you have to have the nutrition to build, right? So the stimulus is going to be the lifting, it's going to be the resistance training, and controversial, but mechanical tension is, I'd say, widely accepted as the strongest stimulus of hypertrophy. So the amount of tension experienced within the muscle fiber itself. You can increase that with load. The angle will change that. The length of the muscle will change that. So you're going to experience greater mechanical tension as you lengthen, as you stretch, right? And they've even actually shown, they've done some research, and they've stimulated hypertrophy just by putting someone in an extreme stretch for an extended period of time. So that mechanical tension, that stress on the muscle fibers, it's what stimulates them to grow. Now, great stimulus. However, if you don't have, adequate protein intake, now, okay, you've got the blueprints, but you don't have anything to build the house with. You have to have both, right? So ingesting a large amount of protein, especially one that's high in leucine, like whey is going to drive muscle protein synthesis. Now, that's going to be fairly transient. It's not going to last very long. And, if you're in a caloric deficit, a lot of times that protein ends up getting used as fuel or as energy rather than to build the muscle. So that's why you see people bulking and then cutting. They're in a caloric surplus. They're getting the protein. They're trying to get their muscles to grow. Then they try to cut down, try to shed some of the body fat that comes with the caloric surplus, and try to hang on to as much of that muscle as they can, right? That's the goal. Unfortunately, a lot of people play that game and they roller coaster between the same 2 points: fat and pretty strong, kind of big, and lean, not so strong, a little bit smaller.
Yeah, if you actually don't know what you're doing, that's pretty rough, especially when you bulk up for a long time and you enjoy your food, and then all of a sudden when you're cutting, the psychological pain is actually, it's hard, especially for the first time.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, and it's like, you tend to have to get a little bit more restrictive and a little bit more focused on what you're actually eating, because it's like, okay, well, if I got a caloric goal of 2,500 calories, now all of a sudden my wings, 3 nights a week no longer fit into that budget, because I have to make sure I'm hitting enough protein to maintain as much mass as I can and still hit, a lower amount of calories. You don't have good micronutrients in there from real foods, salads. You got to get nutrient dense sources of food. You want your food to be calorically minimal while micronutrient dense.
Yeah, like peanut butter when you're cutting and you're weighing them, it's so offensive.
It's very offensive. You're looking like, is that a typo? 2 tablespoons is how much? Oh man, this isn't much protein at all, but man, does it taste good.
It tastes good. How about the range of motion for hypertrophy?
You tend to maximize that mechanical tension in the lengthened position, right? So if you're only doing, half reps and you're only doing from the top half, so in the shortened position, you're missing out on a really big part of that stimulus. Again, you can get hyper specific with this with bodybuilders. They're like, well, I'm trying to target this exact part of the muscle and just right here and not right there. And then they'll do stuff that's very, very specific, maybe shorter range of motion. But generally, like, you want full range of motion in order to get as much of a hypertrophic response as possible.
Mm-hmm. How about bench? Let's talk about bench press. Most people know bench press. Mm-hmm. So you're saying at the very, like, the bottom.
So when we think bench press, we're largely pec driven, right? The size of the pec muscle has a very high correlation with bench press strength. A lot of people are like, oh, it's because you got short arms, or it's actually rib cage shape and pec size that have some of the strongest correlations with bench press output, in addition to technique and experience. But for a bench press, if we're looking at the pecs, as I bring my arms down, now I'm lengthening, I'm stretching my pec muscles, lots of mechanical tension. Boom, that's where you're going to get a great stimulus for growth. And that's why there's this little bit of a trade-off, right? So with dumbbells, I can get more range of motion, but because there's a higher stability demand, I can't actually get as much load. So it's like, okay, which one of these is going to get more mechanical tension? And I do think there's a lot of benefit to changing the stimulus, right? Because your body will kind of get used to a repeated stimulus. So you go from really heavy bench press with full range of motion, but not, past where you can get the bar. And then you go and you bring in some dumbbell bench press where it's a little bit lighter, but you can get more of that stretch. They're a little bit different, right? The stimulus is different.
Yeah, and we got the elephant bar at the gym. Those are nice,
yeah. So like the Buffalo bar, or
Buffalo bar, yeah,
which is Titan's Buffalo bar, but yeah, basically that curved bar. And some of the Swiss bars or football bars have it too, where it's flat and then it comes up in the middle, so you've got more room to bring the bar down. Great benefit in that.
Oh man, it's so nice. I'm glad you guys had that.
Yeah,
as I started using it, I was like, because I don't feel a stretch with just a regular bar.
Exactly. And you like, if someone, let's say someone only, they learned how to bench in middle school and high school, and they're only doing, half benches. All of a sudden they get strong here, and then they start to bring it down to a full range. It's like, oh my gosh, such a stretch. It's like, well, yeah, because you're not used to that, and that the muscle's not used to getting to that length. But then you can take it a step further with those curved bars or dumbbells, or even a deficit push-up, right? You elevate your hands, you drop lower into it, more of a stretch to the pecs, more mechanical tension, stimulus for hypertrophy.
Is that mechanical tension causing the pump? Because I feel a lot of pump. Ever since I started doing that, it's a lot more, the pump's more magnified.
Yeah, it can, right? And it kind of depends on the volume of the training, and hydration status will actually play a huge role in that. Like if you go into the gym and you're really dehydrated, you haven't had much sodium, like you're going to be like, man, I'm chasing that pump and I just can't get there today. It's like, well, glycogen levels. So like, are you getting enough carbs? Are you hydrated? Have you had enough sodium in your diet? And then there's a bunch of 750 million pump supplements out there that can increase that as well. But yeah, like the more blood you drive into the muscle, and then you get the muscular swelling, right? The fluid in the muscle, which actually it's kind of a good segue, because when we're talking hypertrophy, there's actually two different kinds. There is myofibrillar or contractile hypertrophy. So that's the actual muscle fiber. And then there's sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. So sarcoplasmic is going to be more of an increase in enzymes. Like you can increase your phosphocreatine stores a little bit. You can increase fluid in the muscle. That's going to be toward, and this is where hypertrophy gets the rep of being in that, for the longest time, it was 8 to 12 reps, like 8 to 12 reps, 10 to 15 reps. Like that's where you're going to get hypertrophy, but that's going to err much more towards the side of sarcoplasmic, which is great for repeated efforts, right? Like, oh, I want to be able to do multiple reps. But if we're actually talking about the contractile elements, that has to be the heavier load. That has to be the higher mechanical tension. So I don't know if you ever heard the term like density, like, oh, that guy's really dense. generally what that means is they have a lot of myofibrillar or contractile hypertrophy. The muscle fibers themselves are very large, right? Whereas, if someone's been training just really heavy and then all of a sudden they start training some higher volume stuff and it's like, dude, he just blew up. It's like, well, yeah, he hasn't really touched too much on that sarcoplasmic component. So now the muscle itself is big and then there's even more fluid in the muscle. So that's going to be something that is more driven by that pump element, right? Like, I think we all have had a friend who's like, oh, I'm going to go to the gym. I just want to get a pump, and they're just, they're not really progressively overloading, but they're doing enough reps at a heavy enough weight that's like, oh yeah, I look good. Veins are popping. Muscles are all swollen up. It's like more of a metabolic demand on the muscle rather than like a structural demand on the fibers themselves.
Is there a different way of training those two? Or
yeah, I mean, and again, spectrum, right? So it's like you can hit a little bit of A, a little bit of B, or you can, if you're doing more of the really heavy weight in and emphasizing the mechanical tension, that's going to be more of the fiber specific or the contractile protein hypertrophy. Whereas if you're hitting, it's like, okay, maybe we're doing some intervals, maybe we're doing a little bit shorter rest. Maybe I'm doing 6 sets of 15 with 30 seconds rest in between. I'm going to have a hard time driving home if I'm doing arms or shoulders, right? Because I've just got that crazy pump. It's like, oh, I can barely get to the steering wheel. You tend to not get that as much with the high load, low volume training. It's just, it's not as much of a metabolic demand. So you don't get as much of a pump. You don't get as much of that metabolic demand on the muscle. So that would favor more. That's more of the the myofibrillar hypertrophy rather than the sarcoplasmic.
Can you simplify sarcoplasm and what?
And the myofibrillar?
Myofibrillar.
Yeah.
Can you simplify those two real quick?
Yeah. So like, think of let's just call it contractile, right? The myofibrillar, the contractile hypertrophy is like, that is the actual muscle fibers themselves, right? Those are the elements that bring the bone or make the movement happen. Whereas the sarcoplasmic is that fluid around the muscle that it's using as substrates, using as energy, the enzymes, that kind of thing, to have a higher capacity to do that repeatedly. So yeah, one is basically truly, in my opinion, and again, they are both hypertrophy by definition, but I think of the contractile hypertrophy as like the strength hypertrophy, right? The actual fibers that can move the load, produce the force. Whereas the sarcoplasmic, you can think of that as more like the pump hypertrophy, where it's like, yeah, your arm's still going to get bigger. You might not be stronger. You might be able to do any given weight more times, but your 1 rep max probably hasn't changed all that much.
So that covers all of it. Can we go back to endurance and let's talk about let's add some sports in there for examples to make it more concrete. Going back to endurance, right? How about let's say a lot of people like to run.
Okay.
So
totally.
How about let's come up with a rough program for them? What should they train? How do they do it? Sets, reps, etc.
Totally. So, I mean, and I want to frame this a little bit because like even with my endurance athletes, even with my runners, I want them to be strong. I want them to lift heavy. I want them to have strong tendons because, I mean, if you know a runner who's been hurt before, right? Like it's a high impact sport. It takes a toll on his body. I know more runners with bad knees later in life than, just about any athlete, right? It's just very, very common. So you still want to hit the heavy stuff. But if you're looking at the endurance piece, let's say you're running a marathon, right? And you get to mile 20 and you're like, man, my heart and my lungs are full send. I'm good. I can keep going, but my legs are just done. Like I got nothing left. You have to increase the capacity or the endurance of that specific muscle, right? Local muscular endurance. So like if it's my calves that are dying, I gotta increase my capacity of my calves to repeated contractions. You're going to want to do, and again, in this instance, I would say you probably don't want to go to failure, but you want to get to the point where there is a stressor, enough volume where that stressor is present on the muscle that once you recover and adapt, that you can do more. So, in my opinion, a lot of this is easiest to do by building running volume, and not that volume is everything, because it's absolutely not. And there's definitely such a thing as too much volume. But when you're doing the sport, if you build up the volume there, well, what is building endurance? What is building muscular endurance? It's like, well, the muscles that are being used, right? Now, if you still have a deficit there, that's where the weight room can be a great tool to bridge that gap. Okay, my quads are dying and I'm not making it to the end of the race. Okay, well, let's do some high volume sets. Let's hit some run specific movements, lunge variations, step up variations, rear foot elevated split squats, front foot elevated split squats. These are great ways to target those muscles. And, if you don't do it super heavy, you're hitting that, let's say, we'll say 12 to 20 rep range, not going to the point of failure, but let's stress it, a little bit shorter rest periods. That muscle is going to increase the mitochondrial density so that you're able to supply more energy to it more efficiently. You're also going to increase blood flow to that muscle through capillarization, right? So more capillaries around those muscles, the blood and oxygen exchange becomes more efficient. Now all of a sudden, oh, wow, this time around I ran my marathon and, my heart rate got too high or my lungs gave out. Like, it wasn't so much a matter of a muscular endurance component.
How about speed? Like, what's a speed sport? I mean, a sprint one, like a 50-meter sprinters.
Sprinters, yeah.
Yeah.
So when it comes to speed training, and for me, this is more of a practical application because there's always a time component, right? Especially with athletes, they tend to be, a lot of times they're in school and they got a job and you only have this much time for a practice. Like, cluster sets tend to be very effective. So maybe we're doing 4 sets of 6, but we break it down into 4 sets of 3 cluster 3. So now you're doing 2 mini sets of 3 with a little break in between. Not super long, but just enough that you can regain some of that output so that it remains very high and you're still getting that speed adaptation.
Mm-hmm. Can you, in case people don't know what a cluster set is, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to cluster sets, but basically so let's say I had a program where I have 3 movements, right? If the first movement is, let's say it's a step up jump, right? It's like, okay, I want to be really fast with these. I want to be explosive. If I do 6 reps straight, I'm going to have maybe 3 effective reps that hit that target adaptation. And then the last 3, maybe they don't produce the force quick enough, or I'm starting to fatigue and they're slower. And it's no longer seen as the same message to the nervous system to be faster. So instead, I can break it into 3 sets of 2 with, let's say, 30, 40 seconds rest in between. So now that set of 6 becomes 3 mini sets of 2 reps each. I do 2 reps, I take 30, 40 seconds. I do 2 reps, I take 30, 40 seconds. I do 2 reps, right? So a cluster set is just basically a single set of repetitions broken into smaller subsets that are still performed in close proximity. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Power. What's a power sport? Does weightlifting fall under it? Yeah.
100%.
Oh,
yep.
By the way, guys, Olympic weightlifting.
Absolutely. Like and a lot of times if you're looking at the high level, like they're going to be doing sets of maybe 1 to 3, and they're going to take a lot of rest in between, and it's not going to be their max load, but it's still going to be heavy, right? It's like, okay, maybe I got 8 sets of 2 and I'm hitting, 80, 90%. I don't want it to be so heavy that I get fatigue and I can no longer complete the lift. I still want it to be really poppy, but I don't want it to be so light that it doesn't actually increase my ability to improve my rate of force development, how quickly I can tap into my strength. So they're going to have that similar approach as like a speed athlete might, but the difference is that they're going to have higher load and the intensity is going to be different because the volume is probably going to be a little bit higher as well. So like weightlifters and even singles, right? Lots of singles. Maybe you do 12 by 1 at 90%. That's a great way to improve power. But it's interesting because it's power, but they still are trying to do the most that they can do, right? So it's not like they necessarily need to sustain that when they're competing. It's like, all right, you get your attempts. Let's see what you can do. So they can take rest in between. They don't need to be able, the competition isn't, hey, I want to see what you can do 3 times, right? What can you do once? What's your clean and jerk? What's your snatch for 1? But you still have to have enough volume at a high enough load that you get that power adaptation.
Yeah. So yeah, the way they periodize that too, it's like, I think it's common. I mean, most lifting sports, right? Like have your volume high at the beginning, keep it low.
Totally.
Keep the load low, and then it goes the opposite as you progress.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, and you have to have the capacity, right? So like when you have that higher capacity, you can probably recover a little bit better when you start getting into the higher intensity sets later on in the year. If you just go and you start high intensity, low volume, and you try to stay that year round, like there's some people that can maybe do it, but I mean, joints are going to take a toll. And you're probably just, by the time you're supposed to be training in, you might just not be ready for it. Whereas if you hit some higher volume early on in the season, you build up some capacity, now it's not a problem.
Did you say rest too is essential? It's kind of like powerlifting, or not really?
For power?
For power, yeah.
100%, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, not that you don't want to have variety. It's not that you don't want to, again, periodize, right? But like if you're trying to do, let's go back to that 12 by 1. You take 30 seconds rest between those. Whew. Good luck. Yeah, it's not going to happen, right? So you got to have, and everyone recovers a little bit differently, but you want to make sure that you're still able to produce the force you need to complete that lift, and you want to do it technically sound, right?
Okay, or strength. We went into detail about, we talk about powerlifting because I feel like that's the benefactor strength sport, but an interesting one is strongman.
Strongman.
Yeah, because like they do concurrent stuff in there too,
well,
right?
Strongman's an interesting beast, man, because strongman, you need, I'd really argue you need all the elements. You need to be powerful. You need to be strong as an ox. But like they're doing medleys, if you don't have the endurance, it's like, okay, great. Like, let's say we're doing a deadlift medley. You start at 600 pounds and then you go 650 and then you go 700 and then you go 750. Like you're not going to get to the weight that you can move if you're just strong and you gas out. It's like, oh man, I'm not used to doing more than 1 rep. All of a sudden I get to the 4th bar and normally that's no problem when I'm rested, but heart rate stays elevated too long. You just don't have the energy reserves to do it. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I definitely don't have any experience working with strongman athletes, but I've seen the way they train, and dude, they're strong. They're strong as hell, but they are still like, they're conditioned, man. Like they're doing yoke walks, and then they're going into other stuff. Like they get their heart rate high, whereas powerlifting,
well, it's still,
let's not talk about it.
One of the things that I actually want to like cover next is the strength continuum, because when you were here last time, it clicked a lot.
Like absolute strength, speed strength, strength speed, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And like for some reason it clicked to me, like especially for me as a coach too, because like we don't really learn this in the CrossFit level 1 and level 2. So can you walk us through the strength continuum and how they all relate to each other?
Yeah, they're all related to each other in the sense that we talked about that graph, and whenever I think about the strength continuum, I think about the force velocity curve, right? So we even referenced it earlier in this conversation, right? So absolute strength, and the percentages on these ranges vary quite a bit, but like you're talking, let's say 85 to 100%, right? Absolute strength. And then you go down and it's like, okay, strength speed. So it's basically just those terms are a matter of where it falls and the qualities that are most likely to come out of that type of loading. So absolute, then we go strength, speed, and I'm probably going to butcher these percentages a little bit, but like maybe it's 70 to 85%, and then you've got speed, strength.
So the strength speed is kind of like the weightlifting movements.
Yeah.
Snatches, clean and jerks.
And into power too, right? Yeah. Like, and the variations might fall in different places along that line as well, right? Like, are you doing above knee high pull, or are you doing a power clean, right? They can fall into different ranges based on what you're doing. But it's basically, you just keep taking percentages off as you move down the line. And, if we said power tends to peak right around like that 60 to 70%. So, and every athlete will have a point where it's like, hey, this is where their power is the best, right? And that can change as you train and as you adapt. But that's ideally, if you're in a power-based sport, that's like the percentage range that you probably want to spend the most time on going into competition. What has the most application to your sport? What carries over the most? The dynamic correspondence, if you will, right? So, and there's some overlap, right? So we can chart this absolute strength and we can speed, and then you can look at, okay, well, what ranges does endurance go into? Well, that's going to go far to the right. That's going to go more towards speed, but since they're not training for speed, it's going to have a similar percentage of loading with a wildly different volume and output, right? Like if you're training for endurance, you don't see endurance athletes like, well, I'm lifting lighter, so I just want every one of these to be as fast as possible. They want it to be sustained. They want it to be repeatable, right? They want the metabolic stress.
So what absolute strength, speed, strength.
Speed, strength, and then power was narrower, right? But there's some overlap there too. But I read a book, I want to say it was 2018, and right now I'm blanking on the author, but he had used all of his athletes and he basically made the ranges based on what he saw. And again, it's going to be a little bit sport specific there too, right? But he tended to put power right around, I want to say he had it at 60%, right? So speed, strength, and power, like power is going to fall somewhere in there. And then you're going to get into more of the explosive power, and then speed, right? So speed is going to be on the far right, absolute strength's on the far left, power is kind of in that middle, and then you've got kind of these subsets of strength where it's like, okay, this is a strength focus with still taking speed into consideration, because in absolute strength, velocity isn't really a consideration, right? It's just like, okay, let's like lift the weight. Then strength, speed, okay, we're still prioritizing strength, but we're paying attention to velocity. Speed, strength, it's more of, okay, I'm actually prioritizing speed. I care more about the velocity than the load, but I don't want it to be too light. Then you get down to, power, explosive power. It's like, hey, let's make these pop. I care more about how fast you're moving. I care much more about how fast you're moving than the load on the bar. But if you're not still getting a high output, then you're just training speed, right? It's no longer a power adaptation. So there's a point too where like you'll start dropping weight, and based on neurological factors, based on structural factors, like, oh, how come I dropped 10 pounds and I still have the same speed? It's like, well, that is your peak contraction velocity. Even if you take more load off the bar, and for powerlifting, like for me, like the kids would always do their velocity based training and their testing, and they're like, oh, coach, what can you do? And I'm like, well, it's not going to be crazy fast, but like you can keep adding weight on the bar and I'll still be able to hit that speed to a much higher extent, right? My force velocity curve looks a lot different than like a power athlete's would, right? Whereas maybe they don't peak out as much, but their velocity drops slower as they go down with lighter weights.
So you mentioned in the last interview when you were here was that if you increase your absolute strength. The higher your absolute strength, you can express higher power as well. For example,
Yeah.
or can you come
I'm
up
sure
with an
there
example?
are.
Yeah.
I'm sure there
well,
are.
running, I guess, right? Running? No.
Because here's the thing, like we kind of circle back to tendons, right?
Yeah,
and
where
do the tendon adaptations fall?
absolute strength.
Absolute strength.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I know a lot of endurance athletes that are absolutely terrified and super, super against lifting heavy. And it's like, great, but just realize that if your joints and your connective tissue can't handle the beating, like that's a bigger risk of injury than lifting heavy is. Like, that's why you need to have a coach. That's why you need to make sure that you're lifting correctly, because we need to train all the tissues in your body. Your body is a system, right? So if you only care about how far you can run, it's like, okay, well, maybe your cardiorespiratory system can handle that. Maybe your muscle can handle that, but can your connective tissue handle that? Because it's high impact, man, especially when you're running downhill. Like, we're coming up on the Pikes Peak Marathon here. A lot of people are like, yeah, I've got the ascent. That's no problem. But it's like, I come down and they're going to be running down that hill. And if they have not been prepping for that eccentric loading, that hard, heavy impact running downhill, you're either going to slow way, way, way down, or you're going to get hurt.
We have an ultra runner here she did like 175 miles just recently, right?
That's nuts.
That's a lot. But before she joined us,
we're talking over a month, right?
no, this was like, I don't know how.
Yeah, ultra athletes are different, man.
Was 48 hours or something like that, or something like that.
Insane.
Yeah,
dude. Absolutely insane.
Like one session, right? And before she came with us, before she came to CrossFit Endemic, she told us that one of her earlier runs, towards the end, she would get the lean. I didn't know that was a thing because.
Tell me about it.
So towards the end, she'd be running like leaning on one side because one part of the body just gave out. I mean,
like there was just like that much of an imbalance that it couldn't could maintain it.
No, it would not contract back up. So she just ran leaning. And she told me that was actually a thing.
See, I've worked with one ultra athlete quite a while ago. I never heard about the lean, but it kind of makes sense, right? Like, when you get to that level of fatigue, when you take it to that extreme, dude, you're going to find the weak points. They are going to present themselves.
Chris, where can we find you?
Instagram. I'm at Chris Wojchik. I'm not on it as much these days as I used to be, but I still pop in time to time, post a lift here or there.
We'll link you in there.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for coming, man.
Hey, man. Thanks, Clint.
All right, thank you.